I sit here, staring at my phone screen, reading yet another message from my mother. As expected, it's another attempt to guilt-trip me into handing over one of my apartments to my half-sister. The sheer nerve of her request no longer surprises me. No matter how many times I block her number, she always finds another way to reach me. Text messages, emails, even comments under my social media posts, all variations of the same demand. But to understand why my answer will always be a firm no, we have to go back 2 decades. I was just 6 years old when my world unraveled. One evening, my mother sat me down in the living room. Her expression was unsettlingly composed as she idly twisted her wedding ring. Then, in a voice devoid of hesitation, she told me she had fallen in love with someone else. My father was leaving. I watched as he packed his bags, while Mom stood nearby, arms crossed, tapping her foot impatiently, her eyes darting to the clock as if she had somewhere more important to be. She wasted no time moving forward. The ink on the divorce papers had barely dried before James, her new husband, moved into our home. And just like that, everything changed. My princess drawings, once proudly displayed on the fridge, vanished without a trace, replaced by James's meticulously planned work schedule. The pantry, once stocked with my favorite cereal, was suddenly filled with James's preferred healthy options. It felt like my home had been subtly rearranged, leaving everything slightly off, recognizable, yet no longer mine. Meanwhile, my father did his best. He sent regular alimony checks and visited whenever he could, but his business consumed most of his time. Our meetings became shorter, sporadic, always cut off by urgent phone calls about meetings and deals. And then, when I was 8, Samantha was born. I still remember standing outside the hospital nursery, my small hands pressed against the glass, watching as my mother cradled her newborn, with James grinning proudly beside her. In that moment, it became clear I had been erased. Samantha was the center of their universe, and I was little more than an afterthought. Suddenly, my existence became a disruption. Emma, lower your voice. The baby is sleeping. Emma, go to your room. Your mother needs to focus on Samantha. Emma, we can't help you with your homework right now. Samantha has a fever. Emma, eat dinner in your room. Samantha needs quiet. I always had a roof over my head, food on my plate, but warmth, affection, and love were no longer part of the equation. My bedroom became both my refuge and my prison. I spent hours alone, buried in schoolwork, lost in books, or simply staring at the ceiling, trying to make myself as invisible as possible. It didn't take long for James to make his feelings about me painfully clear. Every time I entered a room, he would sigh heavily, as if my presence alone was a burden. Sometimes he'd mutter under his breath, calling me baggage from the past. At night, through the thin walls, I could hear my mother and James talking, their voices carrying easily through the silence of the house. She should be living with her father, James would say. She doesn't belong here. She just mopes around, making Samantha uncomfortable. We can't send her away, my mother would reply in a sharp whisper. David's alimony is too important. We need that money. Have you seen the cost of Samantha's dance classes? And the mortgage? Those late-night conversations told me everything I needed to know. I wasn't a daughter, I was a financial asset. A paycheck. A necessary inconvenience tolerated only because my father's money kept their household running. With each overheard conversation, another layer of my heart hardened. Eventually, the walls I built around myself became impenetrable. As the years passed, the distance between me and my mother's family turned into an unbridgeable gap. Every summer was another reminder of where I stood in their world. While they packed their bags for vacations at beach resorts and amusement parks, I was sent off to my dad's place like an unwanted parcel. Emma, we just can't afford another ticket, my mother would say, avoiding my gaze. But you'll have fun with your father, won't you? And the truth was, I did. Even though our time together was always interrupted by ringing phones and urgent meetings, he at least tried. He would sit with me at breakfast, his phone constantly buzzing, looking at me with guilty eyes. I'm sorry, princess, he would say for what felt like the 100th time. The business is growing and I have to be available. But look, I got you something. Then, out would come the latest iPhone, a new laptop, or the hottest gaming console on the Davida. I still remember the day he handed me my first MacBook, how his face lit up, watching me unwrap it. This is for all those weekends I had to cancel, Dad said, his voice tinged with guilt. I know it doesn't make up for it, but it's perfect, Dad, I reassured him, and I truly meant it. Not because of the expensive gift, but because of the way his whole face softened when I hugged him. But moments like these never lasted. As soon as I stepped back into my mother's house with something new, the storm would break. A MacBook? Samantha shrieked, her face turning red with outrage. That's not fair. I want one too. She'd stomp her feet, tears streaking her cheeks, even though she was 8 years younger and had no real use for a laptop. Look at what you've started, Mom would snap at me, frustration evident in her voice. Meanwhile, James would stand nearby, arms folded tightly across his chest, glaring at me as if I had deliberately set the house on fire. The pattern was always the same. Samantha would throw a tantrum, Mom and James would hover anxiously, and within days, they would cave. Whether she needed it or not, Samantha had to have exactly what I had. One of the worst episodes revolved around an iPad Pro. Samantha's meltdown stretched over 3 exhausting days. I hate you, she screamed at me, her voice raw with frustration. You always get better things. It's not fair. Eventually, Mom snapped. That night, I overheard her furiously venting to Dad over the phone. David, this needs to stop, she said, her tone sharp. These expensive gifts are causing chaos in my household. Samantha gets upset, and we can't afford to keep buying her the same things just to keep the peace. Either get something for both girls or stop buying them altogether. That weekend, Dad picked me up, his expression more serious than usual. We drove to our favorite diner, and over chocolate milkshakes, he finally spoke. Emma, sweetheart, he started carefully. Your mom called me about the gifts. My stomach tightened. I'm sorry, Dad. I didn't mean to cause any problems. He reached across the table, giving my hand a reassuring squeeze. No, honey, you haven't done anything wrong. But I think we need to be more strategic about this. I won't be buying you expensive gadgets anymore. I nodded, forcing myself to swallow my disappointment. But then, he smiled. Instead, he continued in a lower voice, I've started a college fund for you. By the time you graduate high school, you'll have the means to go to any university you choose. My eyes widened in disbelief. Really? Really? But this have to stay between us, okay? No one else can know. I nodded eagerly, feeling something I'd never felt before: security. For the first time, I had something of my own, something no one could guilt me into sharing. Graduating high school should have been a moment of triumph. Instead, just a week later, I found myself sitting at the dinner table, absent-mindedly pushing food around my plate as my mother cleared her throat. Emma, she said, setting her fork down deliberately. Now that you've graduated, there's something we need to talk about. I had seen this coming. The way she had been glancing at my room lately, the hushed discussions with James, it was obvious. Samantha's getting older, and she needs more space, Mom went on, her voice adopting that insincere, overly patient tone she used when she wanted me to comply without protest. She's 10 now, and your room would be perfect for her. It's time for you to move out. Beside her, James nodded in agreement, while Samantha fidgeted excitedly in her chair, practically vibrating with anticipation. I kept my expression neutral, took a sip of water, and delivered my response with careful precision. Actually, I was planning to leave anyway. I'm starting college in the fall. Mom's eyebrows lifted in genuine surprise. College? Emma, you know we can't afford that. Dad's covering the costs, I replied evenly, watching as their tense expressions instantly relaxed. Relief washed over them like a wave. James's posture loosened, and Mom's forced smile turned into something more genuine. Oh, she said after a pause. Well, that's good then. The next day, I began packing up my life. My room, stripped of personality from years of being told, no posters, Emma, it'll ruin the paint, felt smaller than ever. Through the paper-thin walls, I could hear them talking in their bedroom. Finally, James said, unable to hide his satisfaction. "No more dealing with David's daughter. And no more alimony either," Mom added, her voice practically giddy. "I know," she agreed. "I was worried we'd have to keep her around longer." A pause. This really worked out perfectly. Their words should have cut deep. Instead, I felt nothing but a strange, overwhelming relief. 2 days later, I loaded the last of my belongings into Dad's car without a single glance back. Dad did something he hadn't done in years. He took an entire week off work. It was his first real break in what felt like forever, and he used it to surprise me with something incredible, a trip to Santorini. As the plane ascended, I watched my hometown disappear beneath the clouds, feeling lighter with every mile that stretched between me and that house. "I thought we could use some father-daughter time before college starts," he said, giving my hand a warm squeeze. For the first time in as long as I could remember, his phone remained switched off. Our days were spent basking in the sun, attempting and failing to surf, indulging in delicious local food, and having the kind of long, easy conversations we never used to have. In the evenings, we'd sit on the hotel balcony, watching the sky melt into breathtaking hues I had never seen back home. One night, as the ocean waves crashed against the shore in a steady, soothing rhythm, Dad turned to me, his voice unusually soft. "I'm sorry it took me so long to do this." I leaned my head against his shoulder, inhaling the mix of salt air and his familiar aftershave. "You're here now," I whispered. "That's what matters." Starting college felt like stepping into a new world, one where I could finally breathe freely. That fall, I moved into my dorm with a determination I had never felt before. I knew Dad was there to support me, but I wanted to stand on my own 2 feet as well. So, I got a job at the campus cafe, the Beanery. "Emma, you don't have to work," Dad insisted over one of our phone calls. "I can send you a monthly allowance." "I know, Dad, but I want to," I replied, balancing my phone on my shoulder while wiping down a table. "It feels good to earn my own money." Between lectures, work shifts, and late-night study sessions, I carved out a life that was completely my own. My coworkers turned into friends, my professors became mentors, and slowly, the weight of my past began to fade into the background. I loved the rhythm of my new reality, early mornings spent reviewing notes, afternoons making lattes, and evenings buried in books with my study group. Meanwhile, Dad's business was thriving. He bought a gorgeous house in a quiet suburb, and during the holidays, I stayed with him, experiencing a kind of peace I had never known before. We'd watch movies in his home theater, lounge by the pool, and talk about everything, his company's expansion plans, my future goals, and whatever else came to mind. "I have something special planned for when you graduate," he would tease with a knowing smile. "Dad, paying for my college is already more than enough," I'd protest, but he'd just shake his head and change the subject. Each time I visited, his house felt more like home. I had my own room, decorated exactly the way I wanted, something I had never been allowed to do at my mother's. He even handed me a key, telling me I was welcome anytime, even when he was away on business. Back in my mother's world, life continued as though I had never been part of it. Her social media was an endless stream of Samantha dance recitals, school awards, vacations, carefully curated moments of perfection. Occasionally, a relative would ask in the comments, "How's Emma? Haven't seen her in a while." Her response was always the same. "Oh, she's doing well, living her adult life." As if I were some distant acquaintance she had lost touch with rather than the daughter she had raised for years. She had no idea that I had made the dean's list every semester. Didn't know I had been promoted to shift supervisor at the cafe. Couldn't tell you what I was majoring in, who my closest friends were, or what my dreams looked like. My existence had been reduced to a blank space in the carefully polished narrative she presented to the world, and she seemed perfectly fine with leaving it that way. So, I focused on what mattered. I threw myself into my studies, determined to make the most of the opportunities Dad had given me. Between work and classes, I joined the business club, started tutoring underclassmen in economics, and even began considering graduate school. For the first time in my life, I could see a clear future ahead of me, one that belonged entirely to me. One afternoon, as I scrolled through my feed, a familiar image appeared: Samantha's 12th birthday party. The house was covered in balloons and decorations, and every relative had been tagged in the post. Except me. "Our little princess is growing up so fast," the caption read, punctuated with an excessive amount of heart emojis. I stared at the picture for a few seconds before locking my phone and setting it aside. That night, as I locked up the cafe, I realized something unexpected. The ache I used to feel when I saw things like that? It wasn't there anymore. Instead, I felt something else: freedom. Like I had finally put down a heavy weight I didn't need to carry anymore. Graduation day arrived beneath a clear blue sky, the sun shining as if celebrating with us. The crowd buzzed with excitement, but amidst the sea of people, I spotted Dad instantly. He was the loudest one there, cheering my name as I walked across the stage. After the ceremony, as families gathered for photos and celebrations, Dad pulled me aside, his expression unreadable, but with a hint of mischief in his smile. "Close your eyes and hold out your hands," he instructed. I obeyed without question, and a second later, something cool and metallic landed in my palm. When I opened my eyes, I found myself staring at a set of keys and a small envelope. "What's this?" I asked, unfolding the paper inside. It was an address. "Your graduation present," he said, his voice filled with warmth. "An apartment back in your hometown. Fully furnished and ready for you to move in." The flood of emotions was instant. My throat tightened, and before I knew it, I was in his arms, tears streaming down my face. "Dad, this is too much." "Nothing's too much for my little girl," he murmured, holding me close. The apartment was everything I could have hoped for: modern, spacious, nestled in a quiet neighborhood. I secured a job at a local davidetting firm, established a comfortable routine, and, without realizing it, stopped thinking about my mother and her family altogether. Life was steady, simple, peaceful. Then, with a single phone call, everything changed. Dad's voice was unusually quiet when he called. "The test results came back," he said, his words slow and measured. "It's stage 3 pancreatic cancer." The next 2 years blurred into a cycle of hospital visits, chemotherapy appointments, and desperate attempts to explore alternative treatments. I watched the man who had always been my rock grow weaker by the day. We fought together, refusing to give up, but cancer isn't a fair opponent. On a rainy Tuesday morning, his hand in mine, he took his final breath. He was only 54. I moved through the funeral arrangements in a daze, barely registering the condolences, the flowers, the endless formalities. Out of a sense of duty rather than expectation, I tagged my mother in a post about the service. Hours later, her response arrived. "Sorry, but I'm too busy to attend my ex-husband's funeral. Samantha has a dance recital that day." Even in my grief, I felt no shock. The reading of Dad's will left me speechless. He had left everything to me: his company, the house, several investment properties. His lawyer handed me an envelope, my name written in Dad's familiar scrawl. "Dear Emma, I built all of this for you, princess. I wish I could be there to see what you'll do with it, but I already know it'll be something amazing. Take care of yourself first, and if you can, help others too. Love, Dad." I knew I wasn't equipped to run a company, so I made the smartest decision I could. I appointed John Gray, Dad's longtime VP, as CEO. He had the experience I lacked, and I knew Dad would have trusted him. But I wanted to do more, something that would carry on Dad's legacy in a meaningful way. So I established a foundation in his name, dedicated to supporting cancer patients and their families. On the day of its official launch, I stood before a crowded room, taking a deep breath before speaking. "No one should have to fight cancer alone," I said, my voice strong despite the lump in my throat. "And thanks to the David Walker Memorial Foundation, they won't have to." That night, back in my apartment, I ran my fingers over a framed picture of Dad on my desk. "I hope I'm making you proud," I whispered into the silence. The business was flourishing. The foundation was making a difference. And somehow, despite the pain and loss, I was still standing. Maybe that was what Dad had been preparing me for all along. One quiet Sunday afternoon, my phone rang. The name on the screen sent a jolt through me. Mom. After nearly a decade of silence, she was calling me. Emma, can you come over? It's important, she said, her voice strained and unfamiliar. Despite every instinct warning me otherwise, I agreed. Walking up to the house I had once called home felt like stepping into a memory. When Mom opened the door, I barely recognized her. Time had left its David. Her face was thinner, lines etched deeply into her skin, her movements slower. Inside, everything was frozen in time, the same furniture, the same framed photos of Samantha covering the walls. James lingered near the doorway, while Samantha, now 19, sat on the couch, watching me with an unreadable expression. Mom exhaled shakily as she settled into a chair, wincing slightly. I need surgery, she said without preamble. Several, actually. My joints are deteriorating, and without treatment, I could end up immobile. She hesitated, wringing her hands before continuing. I heard about your inheritance, she admitted. About the company, the properties. And there it was. The real reason she had reached out. James cleared his throat, his discomfort evident. The insurance won't cover enough, he muttered. We can't afford the surgeries. I studied my mother's face, the same woman who had disregarded me, neglected me, and dismissed me from her life as if I had never mattered. The same person who couldn't even be bothered to attend my father's funeral. And yet, she was still my mother. The words left my mouth before I could second-guess them. I'll cover the medical bills. Tears welled up in her eyes as she pulled me into an awkward hug, our first in years. Stay for dinner, she said, her voice thick with emotion. We have so much to catch up on. Dinner that night felt surreal. Between bites of food, Mom and James fired off questions, their curiosity barely masked beneath casual tones. So, exactly how many properties did David leave you? Is the company thriving? Are you planning to sell any assets? Their inquiries came rapid-fire, but I was prepared. With practiced ease, I sidestepped each one. The estate is complex, I'd respond smoothly, or everything is managed through trusts and legal structures. Samantha watched this exchange closely, her sharp gaze eerily reminiscent of how I used to observe Mom and James's hushed late-night conversations as a child. As I drove home later that evening, doubts crept in. Had I made the right choice? I had the means to help, and despite everything, a small part of me still clung to the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, this time things would be different. The following morning, I made the necessary calls to arrange payment for Mom's surgeries. Whatever came next, at least I knew I had done what my father would have wanted, rising above past wounds instead of being consumed by them. The surgeries went smoothly. I covered every medical expense without hesitation, ensuring she received the best care. Within months, she was back on her feet, moving with ease as if those difficult days had never existed. That's when the invitations began to arrive. Emma, come by for Sunday dinner. Emma, we're having a small barbecue. Emma, Samantha misses you. Every visit felt like treading on fragile glass. Mom would reminisce about my childhood, skillfully editing out the painful moments as if they had never happened. James would casually steer conversations toward my father's company, his interest thinly veiled. Samantha, on the other hand, observed me in a way that made me uneasy, like she was waiting for something, though I couldn't quite place what. We're a family again, Emma, Mom would say, her hand reaching across the table, her words warm, but her gaze never quite meeting mine. Then Samantha's 20th birthday approached, and when the invitation came, I decided to make an effort. I bought her the newest iPhone, the most advanced model available, packed with cutting-edge features. Maybe it was an attempt to bridge the gap between us, or maybe I simply wanted to give her something she would genuinely appreciate. The gathering was small, just the four of us. No friends. No extended family. Mom had insisted on keeping it intimate, though now I saw the real reason behind it. Samantha tore away the wrapping paper, revealing the pristine white box inside. Instead of excitement, her face betrayed barely concealed disappointment. Oh, thanks, she muttered flatly, setting it aside without even bothering to open it. But more than her reaction, It was the way her eyes flickered toward Mom, as if waiting for confirmation or approval, that unsettled me. Dinner followed soon after. Then came the familiar sound of Mom clearing her throat, that practiced, deliberate noise that always preceded something I wouldn't like. "Emma, sweetheart," she began, her voice dripping with forced sweetness. "The phone is nice, really, but we were thinking, maybe you could give Samantha something more significant." My fork halted midair. "What exactly do you mean?" Mom exchanged a glance with James before continuing. "Well, we know your father left you several properties, and Samantha will be finishing college soon. Wouldn't it be wonderful if she had her own place? You own multiple apartments. Surely one wouldn't be too much to spare for your sister?" Silence settled over the room. James kept his focus on his plate, unwilling to meet my gaze, while Samantha leaned forward, anticipation lighting up her expression. Suddenly, everything made sense: the warmth, the invitations, the renewed interest in my life. It had all been leading to this moment. I carefully placed my fork down. "No." My voice was calm but firm. "I'm not giving away any of my properties." Mom's pleasant facade wavered. "But Emma, she's your sister. Your father would have wanted." "Stop." I cut her off sharply. "Don't you dare tell me what my father would have wanted." A heavy tension filled the room. Mom's face turned a deep shade of red, barely containing her growing frustration. Samantha crossed her arms and slumped back in her chair, sulking at the unexpected resistance. "How could you be so selfish?" Mom snapped, her voice rising. "Your sister deserves." "No," I repeated, this time standing up. "What I deserve is to not be treated like an endless source of money. Not now, not ever." The mask slipped. Mom's expression twisted with anger, her fists clenched at her sides. Then, with a sudden burst of fury, she slammed her hands against the table, sending silverware clattering. "You ungrateful little brat!" she shrieked. "After everything we've done for you, you're just like your father, cold, selfish, unfeeling." Samantha recoiled slightly while James rose from his chair, his posture looming. But I wasn't that powerless child anymore. I met Mom's furious gaze, unflinching. "Everything you've done for me?" I echoed, my voice steady. "Like throwing me out at 18 the moment Dad's alimony stopped? Like making me feel like a stranger in my own home?" Her voice turned venomous. "You were never really part of this family. You were always a burden, always causing problems. And now, when you could actually help your sister, you refuse?" She lunged forward, hand raised. But I caught her wrist midair. My voice was low but firm. "Touch me, and I will go to the police. And then I will sue you for every penny I spent on your surgeries." Her face drained of color. James hesitated, taking an uneasy step back. Samantha's mouth hung slightly open, her disbelief evident. "You wouldn't dare," Mom whispered, her voice hollow. I held her gaze, unwavering. "Try me." I picked up my purse, making my way to the door. Pausing briefly, I turned one last time. "Don't call. Don't text. Don't try to reach me through others. We're done." That was over a year ago. Now, I sit in my office, staring at the city skyline as my phone buzzes with yet another message from Mom. The texts started arriving just days after that final dinner. At first, they were filled with anger. Then came the pleas. The apologies followed soon after. "Please, Emma. We're family. Samantha misses you. Let's fix this." I block each new number, each fake social media account they create. Sometimes I wonder if I'm being too harsh. If, perhaps, there's room for forgiveness. Then I remember Dad's words from his letter: "Take care of yourself first." So that's exactly what I'm doing. The company flourishes under John's leadership. The Cancer Foundation is helping dozens of families. My life is filled with meaning and purpose, built on the values Dad instilled in me. Yesterday, an invitation to Samantha's graduation arrived in the mail. Inside was a handwritten note from Mom. "Please come. We can start fresh." Without a second thought, I fed it through the shredder. People say blood is thicker than water. But in the end, it's the family you choose, the people who stand by you with love and trust, that truly matter.